You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey everybody, and welcome back here to the Signal Watch. I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Simon Day. Hello again.
Welcome back, Simon.
Yeah.
So,
Lovely to be here.
We're very happy to have you here. So we just finished watching a movie I had not seen in many years.
Can I just say this is a Signal Watch podcast, zero defects. How's it feel? Feels good. Innerspace, 1987, directed by Joe Dante, produced by Steven Spielberg, and starring Martin Short, Dennis Quaid, and Meg Ryan.
Yeah.
And I force this upon you for spring break.
It's okay. It's a little off the beaten trail for us here, but I know I've talked to one or two listeners who have past randomly expressed, a love for this movie. Yeah.
I don't know. I just had an urge. I try to follow my urges, and the ones that don't get me arrested. And and I don't know. For some reason, this just felt like a good spring break film. Very kind of joyful film, very fun. I think probably the best second choice for doing that after the Piranha remake from a couple of years ago. But yeah, I don't know. Every time it's kind of a forgotten film, though. I feel it's like, it was supposed to be like a big hit for Joe Dante. It was kind of like, so Joe Dante, had done Piranha, the original Piranha, done The Howling, he'd done Gremlins, which of course was a massive hit for Warner Brothers, and I think was their biggest box office moneymaker until Batman 5 years later. And I think he did Explorers after Gremlins. Didn't really do much, but was well thought of. And then, but Innerspace was supposed to be like really. So I heard that basically they tested Innerspace, and it went through the roof. And Warner Brothers was like, "This is going to be a huge hit." And Joe Dante said so. They didn't really advertise it very much, and I think the advertising campaign wasn't that good. He wasn't very happy with it. It was, and you can still see this in some places, it was the thumb with the little ship kind of parked in it, and Joe Dante was like, nobody knows what that means. That didn't show anything. And then halfway through the release, they tried to change the advertising, I guess, to the faces, the three faces on the poster, which
I remember that poster, yeah,
which we're more used to. But it was too late. It kind of flopped. Although it was one of the first kind of big hits on video. It kind of came back on video and made a lot of money from there, and is well thought of now. So so it has had a kind of life, but it's one of those weird films where you mention it to people, and they kind of go. I mean, both you and Jamie kind of said, we remember that being good, but we haven't bothered watching it for 30 years, kind of. And I feel like a lot of people feel the same. And I think that's a real shame because, it's just got a great script with, if anything, too many plot lines going on. It's got a fantastic cast. I mean, you kind of said it in the opening credits. You were like, whoa, it's kind of like the dream team here. Mm-hmm. Because you've got all the big names kind of at the top of their game in the industry at the time. I mean, Dennis Muren is doing the effects. Rob Bottin is doing the makeup effects. You got kind of Joe Dante's stock of, great character actors in there. You got Kevin McCarthy, Fiona Lewis, Vernon Wells.
Right.
Bennett from Commando. I don't need a gun, John. He turns up as the kind of Mr. Igo. And it's just, I think it's just...
It was even produced by Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall.
Yeah.
And right after that, I think they said the music was Jerry Goldsmith.
Yeah, Jerry Goldsmith. Not one of his most memorable scores, but I think it works really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to see everyone who was kind of piled into this movie that, like you said, has kind of fallen through the cracks over the years.
Yeah, and we can only put that down to, like Joe Dante said, the advertising, really. But it has had this second life, and I don't know. I just, whenever I watch it, I always find it very amusing. It's kind of one of those films that I think, like Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters, is kind of clumped into being a kid's film, but you can watch it as an adult quite happily.
Yeah, it's all ages.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. It doesn't pander. I mean, if anything, there's a couple of, kind of naughty things in there that definitely wouldn't get past the censors these days.
Dennis Quaid's butt would not get you a PG rating anymore.
Well, there's almost also that kind of the famous vibrator scene.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which, it's like, as a school kid, I remember, like, did you see that? Did you see that with your friends? What was that? But yeah, it's kind of, it just works really well, I think.
So I first saw this actually in the theater in 1987. Jamie had mentioned to me it came out in July of 87. We were trying to do some timing on what came when. I don't remember if I actually wanted to see it or not. I was at my grandparents' house in Florida, and my parents were like, yeah, we want to talk to your grandparents without like having to worry about like a 12 and a 14-year-old punching each other. So they drove us to the theater to get rid of us for a couple hours. I remember seeing it in the theater, and I'm going to deviate a little bit from your narrative there. I did not love this movie when it came out. I didn't hate it. Yeah. It just kind of slid in there for me of, all right, that was what it was, and I kind of went on with my day. But I looking back, I was trying to think, like, why didn't this work for me at the time?
Yeah, because that surprised me.
Well, one, I think I didn't love, which is going to sound odd as kind of like a Ghostbusters fan, but I didn't love mixing sci-fi and comedy. It's probably why Back to the Future didn't really work for me terribly well as a kid.
Okay.
Which now I don't know if I don't think I'd have a problem with it. But at the time, I'd already seen Fantastic Voyage.
Yeah.
I still love Fantastic Voyage.
Yeah.
I think I was just more interested in the concepts of the, miniaturization, and can we see more of the inside of the body, and there, you kind of put all these things on the table. Quit distracting me with this wacky Martin Short business.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because originally this started off as a remake of Fantastic Voyage. That was what Joe Dante was interested in doing. And this guy, totally separately from that, turned up with a script about what would happen if somebody was miniaturized and put in somebody else, but somebody who could walk around, not like Fantastic Voyage where he's comatose. And and they spitballed ideas like Michael J. Fox in Arnold Schwarzenegger's body, and how that would work and stuff. Supposedly the script wasn't very good at all, and it took Jeffrey Boehm, who later on would write Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He came in, did almost a virtual rewrite, just keeping that initial idea, and that's kind of what we're watching. And Joe Dante said it clicked for him because he put a bit of humour in, and which kind of like almost made a silly idea bearable or appetizing. It kind of like suddenly it was like, if you put a little bit of comedy in, it kind of like seasons it properly.
So I think part of what is, when you think back to this kind of era of movie making, this is the same era where, if you were making a sci-fi film or really a comic book film, this is always where everyone always felt like they needed to camp it up or apologize. And I think I was really sensitive to that at the time. Like when they made Batman like a serious movie, which if you go back and watch 89 Batman, it is not a serious movie. No. But it was such a shock not to have Adam West.
60s.
Right. And so I think I don't know if I was sensitive at the time to that, but I do know that every time you tried to do anything that was sci-fi kind of for kids, if it wasn't aimed strictly at kids, if you were kind of doing a broader audience, you always had to kind of, for lack of a better term, take the piss out of it by kind of making it funny.
Tell me what you were saying about Back to the Future, because you had the same feeling about Back to the Future. You didn't like how they mixed comedy with sci-fi.
I mean, I would have been much more interested in a guy traveling to the 1950s in a DeLorean and just doing it straight. That was the kind I was reading Isaac Asimov at the time. I was reading Ray Bradbury. I took sci-fi, and it's just
Star Trek.
Absolutely. And this is at the point where you can only talk about Star Trek by putting it on Saturday Night Live and making fun of it. Right?
Although weirdly, kind of around this time, Star Trek 4 where they went back for the whale
Was a comedy.
kind of did the comedy.
Absolutely.
Kind of bit. And I was just saying to you, my version of this was Big Trouble in Little China, which, as a John Carpenter fan, I just couldn't get my head around. Are they doing a kung fu film, or are they kind of doing a horror film, or are they doing a comedy? And I think, that's why I had real problems with that for a while, a few years, actually.
Yeah, and part of me, the comedies I liked during this era were like Naked Gun, Airplane. Like, I liked very silly. I liked Broad, and so I knew what Martin Short.
Did they all have to have Leslie Nielsen?
Yes. Yeah. So I loved Martin Short from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
And during this era, and what I'd seen of him from SCTV, which was being shown a little bit on cable and reruns. I think and of course Three Amigos. And I think I was looking for, he's this amazing physical comedian.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I don't actually remember what I was thinking at this time.
Sure.
But in the movie, he doesn't get to do as much of that as he is capable of. Like, there's so much plot, as you said, that he's kind of drawn into, okay, I've got to run here, I've got to run there, I've got to figure this out, I've got to figure that out, I've got a clock I'm working against.
Well, this is really interesting, because I didn't really... So I should start by saying I came to this a lot later than you, so I probably didn't see this complete, like from beginning to end, until maybe I was even in my 30s. And what I found really unusual about that is normally, if you watch a film when you're a kid, even if it's a bad film, something like Jaws 3 or Superman 3, you kind of...
Whoa.
Richard Pryor skiing down that skyscraper and surviving and going, ooh, with his blanket on. So it's if you watch something like that, you still have a certain love of it. And you kind of, I think you let a lot of stuff go. And that kind of sticks with you for your entire life.
Absolutely.
Of course, if you watch a classic film, it just stays a classic film. With this, though, when I first saw it, I kind of thought, it's not going to be as good as everybody's telling me because I'm too old for this, and this is the first time I'm seeing it, and it's not going to hold up, It's like all the people telling me it's great saw it when they were 12 or 14, and, I'm watching it now. But it did hold up. It was good. And I think it's partly because it's a great script. There's lots of stuff going on. And for me, not having much kind of knowledge or experience of kind of Martin Short, really, because we didn't have his TV appearances in England, I thought, he's a really great... I actually thought the opposite of what you're saying, which is, he's a great physical comedian. Just that bit in The Doctors at the start, where the doctor's like, just sit on the bench, Jack, and he's like, and he hits him with a hammer on his leg to get his reflex, and he kind of kicks the tray and then falls off the back. And I'm like, this is kind of great. And I can kind of see what you mean, as in, he's also got to run from place to place and push the plot forward. But I think, when he's trying to get in the car from the freezer truck, there's still enough stuff in there to really... Yeah,
I was laughing out loud at that sequence.
Yeah.
And I just wanted, I think, then and now, more of that.
Yeah. I'll tell you who is also excellent in this. And, and we can talk about this more later. But I just want to give a shout out to Robert Picardo. Because Robert Picardo not only makes a very silly character called a cowboy kind of come to life, but then he has to play Martin Short pretending to be the cowboy. So he's got to get Martin Short's kind of like physicality down. Yeah. And he really does.
So Picardo had been in The Howling.
Yeah.
I just made that connection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so Joe Dante's got his little stock company.
Right.
And in this you had Picardo, you had Henry Gibson, who turned up later in The Burbs, I think. Mm-hmm. And of course, you had Archie Hahn, who'd also been in some stuff before. And of course the big one, who's in everything, is Dick Miller, who in this didn't have much to do, who's just the cab driver. I think he's got like one good line.
And he's wearing his own clothes.
He's wearing his own clothes. But yeah, Dante always used his same kind of like players. And Kevin McCarthy, of course, who was in Piranha, is the Mad Doctor in Piranha. Mm-hmm. And of course he peppers it with, sci-fi stars from the 50s, who he, I guess, just wanted to hang out and talk to. And like I was saying earlier, we've also got Vernon Wells, who was Wes in Mad Max, and of course Bennett in Commando, the most out of shape Special Forces soldier, I think, ever on celluloid, who liked to dress as Freddie Mercury on his days off. And Fiona Lewis was a British actress who, is quite a babe, I think. She's kind of one of my favourites from the 80s. After this, weirdly, she didn't do anything until the 2000s, and there's hardly any credits after this. And maybe she just retired, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But she always plays saucy doctors in everything. Saucy, slightly sinister doctors.
Huh.
And she also plays exactly the same role in The Fury. Brian De Palma's The Fury.
Okay.
And also plays the same role in a couple of Aussie horror films as well. So it's always like, if you want like a sexy but sinister doctor who's probably got other stuff going on, get Fiona Lewis.
That's a very specific niche. And maybe what happened is they quit writing those roles. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe they weren't allowed anymore.
Yeah.
So.
In the main cast, then, aside from Martin Short, is Dennis Quaid and Meg Ryan, and
who are also both great, but I think Martin Short kind of steals it's his show, really, isn't it?
Well, it's Meg Ryan. This would have been pretty early for her.
She looks really young.
She looks really young.
Yeah.
I actually am going to disagree. I mean, I never have thought Meg Ryan was a great actor.
Okay. Because I liked how she handled the comedy there. I mean, one of my funniest lines in this that I still kind of say to people every now and again, and they give me scared looks and move away, is, how did you get Jack's hair? Which always makes me laugh in this, because after, the cowboy's changed his face, Jack's changed his face to the cowboy, it's like, she kind of says that. It always makes me laugh. But, I think she does a good job. Why don't you like her?
I don't know, but it goes back to, like, this era. Like, when I was a kid and I'd see a movie with Meg Ryan in it, that was Do
you not feel like she was sullied after this, though?
Not really.
When she did too many romantic comedies with Tom Hanks and stuff.
Yeah, I never thought she was very... in acting, there's this idea of indicating.
Yeah.
Of, like, you're not actually expressing that. You're not actually feeling that and bringing it to the role. It's your, like, oh, I'm sad, so I'm going to make a sad face. Like, I feel like that's her... Like, that's as much acting as she really... I've seen her in a few things... Joe versus the Volcano, I think she's actually pretty good in. And I think that, like, in weird stuff, like The Doors, she was good.
Yeah.
And that stuff that was kind of off the beaten path from the, like, American Sweetheart thing. But, like, I don't like When Harry Met Sally. I don't like, I don't want to just, like, go off on Meg Ryan here. This would have been one of the first things I would have seen her in, so I didn't come in with that. And I don't remember that other than, that's the girlfriend of the movie.
I mean, I'm not saying a lot of people in this don't do mug quite crazily. I think her muggings may be the most obvious. Like, I kind of know what you're talking about towards the end, where she shoots the gun and pulls a couple of faces, and I'm like, she's kind of overdoing it a bit, and that's saying something when you're standing next to, like, Martin Short, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think maybe the others are better kind of switching between that and naturalism. Whereas she can't as well, perhaps. Because Dennis Quaid's great as well. I mean,
he is. And fortunately, the role that is so outdated now, like watching it. I mean, Dennis Quaid in this movie has a serious drinking problem that goes completely unaddressed for the entire movie.
It is funny having watching a kids' film. And, to a certain extent, I'm like, I miss kids' films like this. But then at the same time, it is amusing watching it where, like you say, Dennis Quaid basically does have a drinking problem and everybody's smoking. Yeah. Everybody's smoking like a nutter, all over the place.
Yeah, that was just expected. When adults weren't around kids, they were clearly smoking and drinking. Like, that was just what you thought from movies. So, and maybe they were, I don't know. But, if someone was in a lab coat working on a computer in the 80s, you could guarantee they were going to be smoking at the same time.
Well, even when, like, Dennis Quaid tells a story about, I think the first time he met, Meg Ryan's character, because, like, I guess, like, Martin Short's wearing the jacket and it reminds her. And Dennis Quaid's like, I was wearing this the first time you interviewed me, and we stayed up to 3 and talked about everything under the sun. And then I got drunk and fell down a manhole. And I'm like, it's not a very good story. It's kind of quite depressing. So, at the end they're married and you're like, I'll give it 6 months.
Yeah. It's like he has made no commitments to change his ways. All he's done is realized,
Although, perhaps Dennis Quaid himself, I know he had a drinks problem, so maybe There's not as much acting as we think going into this.
I'm sure it didn't seem like a big deal in coke-heavy 1980s, Hollywood.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier on that you said Dennis Muren did the effects?
Yeah, who of course went on for Jurassic Park.
These effects hold up so dang well, shockingly well.
They do, and I think part of the reason for that is a lot of them are practical.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for instance, something I read today, because I had a tiny Google before I came, and one of the things I read was actually
a tiny Google
just before I left, was the fat cells he sees. I think when Dennis Quaid first arrives in Martin Short, but he doesn't know where he is. He kind of wakes up, and you see all these fat cells kind of bobbing about outside his window. They're simply balloons that they kind of just put up and kind of smeared with Vaseline, and they look great. They look fantastic. It's just a lot of this is done with old tricks like lighting and miniatures and different perspectives.
I guess because I don't know if it was miniatures on miniatures, but one of the things I expected to see was bad matting of the little craft inside like the blood vessel.
Yeah.
But it's all seamless. Like, and this DVD was, I don't know if they cleaned up the film.
It looks really good. Really good.
Absolutely, like how I kind of remembered it in my mind's eye from the theater. And again, this is the stuff I was into, was it's a tiny craft moving through someone's bloodstream. And it's like, as much as I enjoy that in Fantastic Voyage, you gotta have some willing suspension of disbelief when you're watching Fantastic Voyage.
Well, yeah, Fantastic Voyage is like, we're kind of like we're being chased by multicolored crepe paper.
Yeah.
and it looks like that. And tinsel.
But it's so much further now from 1987 than 87 was from Fantastic Voyage.
It would be interesting if somebody did a remake of this, and I don't know if there's any interest in that. I've kind of heard rumours that for ages, going back the last 20 years, Cameron's been talking about doing Fantastic Voyage again. It would be very interesting, because we're at the stage where we can film the inside of the body, and we do know what it looks like now, and just what they could do with that.
It'd be super gross.
I was thinking, would it be almost like too realistic?
I don't know how realistic you actually want things to be inside people's stomachs or whatever in 70 millimeter.
Because this is fun where, for instance, and spoilers here, but again, very old film, go and watch it before you listen to this. But at the end, where he basically gets Jack to set off his ulcer so he can digest the bad guy. Stuff like that kind of looks great, but I'm sure it's nothing like real life,
Yeah, no, yeah.
It's like a mini volcano.
Right. For what it is, I don't know how scientifically accurate it is, and there was a point too at which they're passing between in a kiss, so it's just saliva on the edge of the lips. Which
you said, and we were both thinking a minute ago, who's in her uterus, looking at, I guess, his baby, his son or daughter. And the next minute he's hanging around the lips inside, which seems a bit dangerous to me.
Yeah.
In case,
That's where you want to be at the absolute last second so they can remove you.
Yeah. And I think the last third starts breaking down a bit, when they shrink the villains, and it starts getting too silly. Stop that. By that point, I think they've got enough momentum to carry through.
Yeah, that was one of the things that watching this movie, Joe Dante has a very particular sense of humor that I think you see pop up in things like Matinee and
Looney Tunes, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's like at the beginning when he's chasing.
Ozzy?
Ozzy is getting chased through the mall.
Yeah.
And there's like the clowns everywhere, and there's these animal characters everywhere, and it's like there's this big laugh of the last thing he sees is all of these mascots leaning in over him.
Yeah, and there's some really weird kind of offbeat comedy touches, and I think that's why I keep going back to this, because I love that scene.
I just want like 10 times more of that in this movie. Like, it could so have handled it, and then it goes and plays it straight for a while, and then you have to have I don't know what happened with our relationship and all this stuff, and it's like it just feels almost overwritten, where if they just let Dante go or just
you want to watch Gremlins too if you want that.
Right. I love Gremlins too, and I just I like I said, I like madcap, Naked Gun type comedies. So
I do agree with you to an extent, but I think if they had gone further with this, because this is really pushing the boundaries, I think you wouldn't have believed it so much, because they are trying to keep this at least a little bit grounded.
Are they?
Well, I mean, he's got this pod in him. He's on the run.
And there's a bad guy with a removable hand, and there's...
I like that. That's very Bondian. I like how McCarthy is basically a Bond villain, and he's got a great sidekick. It's like, Mr. Igo, get my chip back.
Yeah, well, I mean, and one of the moments where I laughed really hard when we watched it.
He's got a white dog instead of a white cat.
Yeah, he's in this like eating this fancy meal or in this fancy office, and with the white dog sitting on the glass table, and then they pull back, and it's
just like a corner of
a huge empty warehouse floor.
I mean, that's just weird in general, but also I was like, is that just like one of the many tower blocks he's building, and that's just where he's set up at the moment? I don't know. It's like,
I don't want to know. I just want more of that in this movie. Like, it's just, and the villains are that absurd. Like the sexy doctor, the removable
there's basically
hand.
4 great villains, who are all kind of working together, and that's kind of brilliant, you know, and especially when they kind of fall out, or when they realise that, you know, the cowboy's actually Jack, and they're like, you know, kind of like, have I ever told you about his fantastic tolerance to pain? He's like, my what? And also, I mean, Kevin McCarthy's just great anyway, because one of the scenes I love, and I love lots of scenes in this, is so supposedly they were just waiting for the lighting to be finished or an actor to turn up, but he was just there with the dog, just waiting, and Kevin McCarthy just started ad-libbing with the dog and like just improving. And the dog sat up and begged, and Kevin McCarthy was, never beg, never beg. And Joe Dante was like, that's brilliant, let's film that.
Absolutely. That was what I wanted more of. Like, if it could have been nothing but that character doing that stuff, and just like, even the fact he decides to ride in the back of the truck with, like, it doesn't make any sense for him to do that.
It doesn't. And also, if you kind of miss this the first couple of times you watch it, but basically McCarthy's just sitting there kind of gibbering to himself. He's telling a story about how he lived in Alaska and killed elks. And it just goes on and on.
Yeah, I assume he was just improv this whole story, because none of this matters. It's all about the other actions. So yeah.
So you know, so that's always brilliant. It's just, I mean, it just makes me happy, this film. I guess that's the best way to put it. It just sort of makes me smile even thinking about it. There's also, like, I should mention, I feel like I mention this every podcast, but there's a horrendous music video. So you probably noticed in this, we've got like a little Sam Cooke for the kind of the lovey-dovey stuff between Dennis Quaid and Meg Ryan. We've got they go to a club kind of in the middle to kind of like
Club Inferno,
which is like very very like the club out of Terminator, isn't it? It's like one of those 80s clubs.
Yeah, there were a lot of 80s staples like that in this movie.
And they're playing like Wang Chung and a couple of other guys, I think. But the big one, the music video I'm talking about, and please feel free to put a link to this, because again, it's terrifying, is Rod Stewart over the end credits does a cover of Twisting.
I was actually going to bring that up before the podcast ended.
And it's like, you know, and it's kind of like Twisting the Night Away, and it's like, you know, it sounds alright, but the video is Rod Stewart in an all-leather suit, surrounded by, you know, no surprise, 20-year-old blondes, in black and white, trying to be a bit arty, dancing flat out on a roof, and it's like one of the most terrifying 80s things you ever see. It's basically like, no, granddad, back to your room.
We'll definitely be linking to that in the SoundCloud. But yeah, no, there's definitely, you know, the tick-offs, like, they have to go to a club where, you know, stuff is going down, and yeah, there's
and I'm sure
the kind of daffy girl who's involved, but they really did up the daffy girl. Like, she's really,
and she was
pretty
great
funny
as well.
Yeah, like, and I'd like to know how much of that she improvised or how much she worked out with them. But even like her making sacking groceries funny is hard.
Oh yeah. Well, she puts the really heavy orange juice in a glass container on the eggs, and it smashes them down. Yeah. I love when she comes in the office as well, where, like, you know, Martin Short's like kind of recovering from having a bit of a breakdown, and he goes, and she's carrying a coffee and a cigarette, and he kind of goes, "Oh, coffee," and she goes, "Yeah, I got it down the hall." Just like hangs on to it. It's like she's so selfish.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
And it does all set him up for that final line of,
Yeah, no chance.
no chance, never in a million years. So, yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely fun. I wouldn't say not to watch it. I wouldn't, bag on this movie. It may not be exactly right, but, I would have a lot of the same things to say, honestly, about, like, Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Which are, other people absolutely love. Of, it's like, keep your time travel out of my comedy,
I will say, watching it tonight with you, I felt like, A, the middle bit drags a little bit, and B, it is probably too long.
If this movie were being made now, most of the introduction of the characters would have gotten jettisoned. Yeah. Or they would have somehow managed a way to communicate all of that in about 30 seconds per character. Because the visit to the doctor, while it's got some good comedic bits, it doesn't necessarily advance the plot. We kind of get the idea he's a hypochondriac, but you can do that in other ways. And that is the whole scene where we meet Dennis Quaid is now, of course, just not great by modern standards, but
he's basically drunk and abusive at the parties.
Yeah. and then with his girlfriend who's like, yeah, I'll stay the night with you after that. It's
not a good role model,
right? And it doesn't need to be a good role model. He doesn't need to be a great guy, but it's also like it just keeps happening. I was like, man, I don't remember any of this from the first time I saw it.
Well, it kind of reminds me of Tom Atkins' character in Halloween 3. Which is totally separate from all the Michael Myers stuff. It's a standalone story, but he plays a doctor in that, and the whole joke is, I saw it with a friend like years ago, and we were just like absolutely laughing because he's so obviously an alcoholic in it, which you didn't catch when you were a kid,
right?
But like, he's with this young girl and they stop the car so she can make a phone call, and he comes out of a shop with a six-pack and goes back in the car. And you're like, he couldn't wait until they even got to the hotel. It's like, but that was usual. That was usual in the in the 80s. Yeah. So
I mean, there's definitely places it could have gotten tightened up. I think that may have helped with some of the reception. When the movie came out. I've not gone back and read like Ebert's review from this or anything.
Funny you should say that, because I actually watched that today, Siskel and Ebert, and they actually gave it a good thumbs up. They had a really funny comment though. Like, one of them said something kind of stupid, like, I think they actually did film in a real body.
Oh, they just like the effects that much?
Yeah. Okay. And I'm like, I think even in the 80s you did kind of go, no, they obviously didn't. But apart from that, they kind of said it was kind of good. They said it was very good entertainment, which I'm not saying you have to rely on their views, because I think they hated The Thing and several other films that we love, but it's just weird that it kind of like just had everything going for it and then totally missed. And like I say, like Joe Dante said, all we can think is that was down to a botched advertising campaign, maybe massive overconfidence by the company, by the studio. I think they thought they could just throw it out there and it would take and roll, and instead it just didn't.
It's a good question. I know when I,
because I'm sure they were like, by the director of Gremlins and Steven Spielberg producing. It's like everybody will go and see this. I
mean, my memory of it was seeing kind of trailers of, it's going to be the greatest adventure on the smallest scale or whatever, and and then it was like Martin Short like going in the camera, and it was kind of like, okay, I kind of get what this is. And maybe people felt like they'd already seen the movie from the trailer even, because there wasn't, once you kind of get, okay, he's accidentally in Martin Short, that is kind of the movie. And
that is, and you're right actually, because I remember watching, I guess, like kids TV shows, like Saturday morning TV shows, and this was definitely my period where I remember watching a-ha perform live, and they showed clips from this and the Living Daylights and stuff, and whatever was out that couple of years. And I remember thinking, well, obviously he doesn't get injected into the rabbit, something goes wrong, and he gets injected into a guy, and then that guy seems to be on the run. And I think you're right. If I glean all that from a couple of clips, I mean, there's not much left to really watch, maybe.
Yeah, and you know, when I was a kid,
just how does he get there? Really?
Yeah, and it's like, well, it's not like Martin Short with Steve Martin. It's Martin Short with kind of an action guy, and maybe that alone.
It's almost like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, really. Isn't it? They're trying to go for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, but even, you know, Dino had his, you know, Dennis Quaid, I don't think was known as a comedic actor.
Well, we haven't really talked about Dennis Quaid, because you said at the start of this, well, he was the established one.
Yeah.
Because at this point,
he'd been in The Right Stuff. He'd been in some other stuff. I mean, I remember knowing who he was when this came out.
Jaws 3D.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I would have seen that by then.
With Dreamscape, I think.
In Dreamscape, yeah. I mean, there was just he was the, you know, I think that he wasn't a huge star at this point. I mean, Dennis Quaid's always kind of been at Dennis Quaid level, like everybody knows who he is, sort of thing. But yeah, no, Dennis Quaid was, you know, established. People knew who he was for sure at this point. Yeah, much more than probably Meg Ryan. Martin Short was known was making that change over to the big screen, which he didn't after this. He did like Clifford in like 1992 or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There was another one, wasn't there? And I'm not sure if this was the beginning of the end, kind of mainly for Martin Short on the big screen, because he did Three Fugitives as well, didn't he? And a couple of other things. But I don't think anything really stuck. Nothing stuck. Because, I mean, I only remember the title of Three Fugitives. I think there was a child in it. Nick Nolte and Martin Short.
See, this is very Coke bingey 80s thinking of... We got Nick Nolte for somebody.
It's like twins again, basically.
Yeah. We've got Martin Short. We've got a child.
I mean, I think it's kind of sad though, because I feel like Martin Short in this reminds me, and is as great as Rick Moranis in Ghostbusters, and I feel like this should have vaulted him over the top.
I don't think he's as good as Rick Moranis in Ghostbusters here. I'll go ahead and say it, but I don't think that's his fault. I don't think he was given enough opportunity.
Sir, I take that comment and I throw back the fact that Rick Moranis only had to do about 3 or 4 great, I will say great, but little sketches, whereas Martin Short's got to support the whole film there.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I think by making him do things that were less interesting than what he was capable of doing. And there's even little stuff, I don't know how we're going to cut this all together, but there's even there's little stuff like he could be getting the explanation from Dennis Quaid.
Yeah.
But he keeps kind of like talking over him or whatever, and when he, instead of like, no, this isn't like a voice going like kill, you know, or kill the postman or anything. It's someone who is having coherent sentences and saying,
but he's a hypochondriac,
right?
So he probably thinks something's bad is happening to him.
But you know, there's like a whole period where we also know he gets all the way from the doctor to his apartment, and what happened in between where Dennis Quaid was offline.
I think Dennis Quaid is offline because he's kind of like, I think he kind of gives up for a while, and he's like, no, look, we do have to talk.
Yeah. When
he kind of gets back. But I know what you mean, and I don't think you can put too much rational thought.
No, you're not intended to. This is the same movie that has like the penguins as the last thing the guy sees. And I think, and that's all fine, but it's
miniaturized villains at the end, which is great, even though that's probably the worst effects, but it just makes me laugh when...
Except they made a giant phone for Kevin McCarthy to hold in a giant phone booth. I was like looking at that going, they really made a giant phone. They had to have made it, or found a giant phone for that sequence.
No, you're right. Yeah, because that isn't an effect. They are standing in the phone. So and I do love when Margaret Fiona Lewis goes, you have got a credit card, haven't you, Victor? All big men do. It's kind of great. It's just so cheesy, but it's great.
All right. Well, I think we've probably talked more about Innerspace than we have any reasonable reason to. Do you have any other thoughts on the film?
All I can say is play with it, but don't talk to it. It's my last words.
And I think we'll end on that. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll do it again soon.
See ya. Bye.
Bye. So we finished rolling, and Jamie came in the room with something to say about Innerspace.
She hasn't been sitting here for an hour.
She has not been sitting here for an hour, but we're pointing the mic at Jamie now.
Quietly sitting here. Yeah, so I actually loved this movie when I was a kid. It was one that played all the time on HBO, and I remember, I think the year of 1988, I watched it probably 10 times, but I haven't seen it since then. Watching it again, it held up pretty well, but I think it actually, and I noticed this even at the time, suffers a little bit from a tone problem. Like it is a comedy, but it wants to tell a serious story. Yeah. And there are just some moments in here that are just, I felt even when I was a kid, were almost embarrassingly goofy.
Do you think there's too many strands, we were saying earlier? There's too much plot going on?
No, I'm thinking specifically of like the face change sequence. It was a little too much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I still have a very good fondness for this movie. Yeah. And I also did want to mention, because you were talking earlier about the scene with Martin Short in the doctor's office at the beginning being kind of not needed. It does set up the comedy bit later for his nightmare, though.
Yeah.
That actually works really well, though.
That does work really well.
Well, it worked. But that sequence would honestly probably still work whether it were a nightmare or not. It's just funnier that it was his nightmare.
I mean, I guess like Ryan said, if they remade it now, they'd cut out the doctors and the sequence with the woman in the supermarket, and they'd just have a quicker version where he's at home and he's like, oh, I don't want to go out, there's too many germs or whatever. Yeah. And they'd do it that way.
Yeah, so. I think you're right. I think they would, but I don't know. That.
I mean, I like the fact that they did that,
yeah.
But it also suggests that Martin Short has some sort of psychic power. I mean, maybe. It's hilarious that they did it, and it's great that they used these character actors for the sequence, who, if you knew movies from the 80s, both she and her husband from that sequence, and I'll find the actors' names and link to them. But
we forgot to mention,
and I did love that in the scene where it's waiting in his doctor's office, it's his old comedy buddies with him from SCTV, Andrea Martin, and I can't remember the guy's name, but they're sitting on the couch together. So, and they do this great bit back and forth where he's listening to Dennis Quaid, but of course they can't hear him. Like, what did you say? No, I didn't say anything. Blah blah blah.
Well, we also forgot to mention, actually, I think I mentioned him very briefly, but like his manager is played by
Henry Gibson,
who we saw pretty recently in The Long Goodbye.
Yeah.
And he just makes me laugh. His lines aren't even that funny.
He's a laughing guy, right?
Yeah.
But he's like, it's coupon day, Jack. You can't be late. It's like fantastic.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
A spring break movie. That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.